What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Movie Emporium's TV review of the Apple TV Plus original series Severance Season 2. This will follow Episode 3, which is called Who is Alive, and is directed by Ben Stiller. Okay, so at this point, I'm starting to wonder if Season 2, as long as it concludes in a really interesting fashion, might be the best of the two seasons, to be fairly honest, because every episode of this season is just another continuation of a really fantastic season so far. It's an episode that has a lot going into it. It's a lot quieter than the last two episodes, but still has a lot to issue into itself, issue into its world. I think Ben Stiller and their writers are pushing a lot of new narratives into the story, and I think this episode is moving places and parts and pieces that really kind of envelop who these individuals are, what exactly may be going on at Lumen, and introducing new aspects to characters that we maybe don't know about, or maybe know about, stuff like that, and introduces new ideas that are really well implemented. And I really enjoyed this episode. It's another 9.5 out of 10, to be fairly honest. I think the last episode was a little bit better, but I think on a level of just what it's doing is really fantastic and really fascinating. And this episode really does a lot, to be fairly honest. It really is an interesting thing. So how to tackle this episode, because Mark is trying to find ways to, in essence, bring in what he would call ideas and questions, and trying to work his way into allowing his Innie to remember stuff that he brings in from the outside. We see, who is alive on the lamp thing, and he's trying to burn that into his memory. He's trying to count down. He's trying to do everything possible for his Innie to work with him. And as we see, and we'll see later on in the episode, it just isn't a possible thing. There is a thing that they've implanted, this chip implanted into their minds, which is basically, as Ragabi says, it causes the brain waves to be slightly off. The different waves of the functioning brain are mismanaged, not really mismanaged, but are missed. They're kind of reconfigured as he goes up. Your pupils dilate, your brain waves kind of switch, and you forget everything that has been going on. And let's say the Outie doesn't remember the Innie, and so on and so forth. It's a security measure that Lumen has perfected, and therefore it doesn't matter what Mark does, he can do everything in his power to try and make his Innie remember stuff, and it's not going to work. And it's just, I love watching Outie Mark try everything possible to get information from inside Lumen, and once again, as we see, it just doesn't work. I like the simple fact that it leans into some information about how Rickon and that book that he wrote, and how Natalie comes out into the open to Rickon, and Devin is very cautious of her. And why does his book need to be changed? Because apparently it's become really popular with the Lumen people, so therefore they want Rickon to write a new version of the book, which is very telling of Lumen itself, because Lumen is all about misrepresenting the facts. It's all about changing things that people don't want to see. If you remember the newspaper article, it had a lot of stuff written out. So they're all about kind of revamping the narrative so that they can control it in a lot of respects. And that's why Natalie's there. That's why she's talking to Rickon. It's also, I'm assuming, trying to keep the Outies in check, which is really fascinating. That's what, we saw what happened with, of course, Milchek, and of course, Irving and Dylan. And it's a really fun thing to watch. And I love the Natalie character, because she is an individual that has such mysterious aura to her, but she also is very menacing, and she's able to wrap herself around the different individuals. We see her later on, which I'll talk about the Innie stuff. But I like Natalie's character. I think she's a really fascinating individual. I think the actress who plays her is really nice. It really does a really nice job. But I like the simple fact of what the Outie Mark is trying to do, and what he's trying to what his character is trying to say, and how they're trying to represent him. We'll talk about the Ragabi stuff a little bit later, but I just kind of want to say his initiative to get his Innie to work with him is something that a individual with a lot of drive, because of his wife. Now he knows his wife possibly might be alive. He wants information. It's a really kind of dramatic and really compulsive nature of what humanity does, and I really appreciate that. And as we see later on, the Innie portion of Mark, it really reflects of how the nature of the kind of theorizing of what's going on is really it's an interesting thing because I'm starting to garner theories as I rewatch these episodes of what possibly is going on. You know, things that I never thought about, things I never realized. The one theory that's been kind of spreading around, and if you watch like the intro like to the series, especially this season, there's a lot of babies. There's even a baby Egan that's running around. There is a moment where they're on the grass, which we'll talk about later, which is insinuating the possibility that the theory is that it has to do with cloning, because as they talk about with Dark Harbor, there's a lot of stuff that has to do with genomes and the idea of like the 25th representation. And I think it's a very good possibility. I think it's a very interesting possibility. I don't think Cold Harbor is 100% dealing with cloning, but I think it has to deal with like, how do we keep these characters, how do we work on these characters? How do we kind of, teach these individuals who come as they wake up in their Innie self, they're basically babies, and how do we kind of form, and how does that brain work? Because a lot of this series of Severance, injecting the thing into the brain, controlling what they know. There's a lot of manipulation of like human psychology and human emotion and human ideology and the brain and how the brain works. There's a lot of going into there. So they're really studying the kind of machinations of what the brain's electrical waves and how it works on a visceral level as well as a surface level, and I find that really fascinating. But once again, if you look at like MDR, the macrodatics and stuff like that, and you look at like O&D, and you look at all these people, O&D is working on a surface level thing of like how pictures and emotions make you feel, the idea of like things being reproduced and stuff like that when it comes to like the let's say a picture or like an object, is reorganized and reproduced. And with it comes like when we see Mark and Helly go to the mammalian, I think it's called, or mammalian or whatever, however Gwendoline Christie says it, which is really another interesting thing because they're dealing with like reproduction stuff as well as the reproducing of the brain. How does the brain work? The nature of like, if you keep doing the same thing over and over, how does that make you feel? How does that make you operate? There's a lot of emotionality and a lot of motion that's running into this episode with, when you see Felicia, finally, she comes back into the mix when, of course, Irving uses the hall pass. The emotional stakes of like, the talking of Bert, like what he did, how he works himself, the nature of like Dylan going to see his wife Gretchen, when he sees and he sees the Aldridge version of his wife and the kids. There is something that Lumen is doing, that they're studying human emotion and human ideology. Why they're doing that is not 100% clear, but when you lean into the possibility of cloning, and how do you clone an individual and make them feel like individuals, it leads into like that 6 day thing with like the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, where each individual time is a mistake that has to be replicated and reconfigured, and putting the emotions and things that make you feel uncomfortable into these different boxes helps try to regulate. And the simple fact that we don't know as human beings how the human mind works, and so therefore I think Lumen is working that effect, and they're doing it in a very mysterious and dark manner, and you're not on the level. So why did Miss Casey go down to why did she go, I think it was like the exports facility or whatever, why did she go down there? And like there's a lot of stuff that's left open that is not fully explained because we're only in the 3rd episode of a 10 episode season, but there is enough there that you're starting to put the pieces together. And I'm going to be really interested to see when we get to the 4th episode that like I said, I have seen, so I kind of know where it's headed, where it's going to play into some interesting things about human nature and what it takes for human nature to work. So it's going to be interesting to see after what people think after the 4th episode. But I really love the nature of all the Innie stuff. I love what Mark and Helly are doing. There's rumors that Helly is the Innie version of her. I mean, the Outie version of her. So that's a possibility. I love when they go to where we meet Gwendoline Christie's character, where she is this individual that works with the goats. They've been looking for the goats. Where are the goats at? And I love that. I love the idea because what is this? Why does it look like an Irish landscape? Why does it look like an Irish farm or a farm of sorts? Like, why is it inside this building? Why are these goats here? Why is there a guy in a black goat costume? What are these people? Why do they look so grungy and like really kind of dark, and you start learning that these different places in Lumen have these different ideologies and different psychology methods of control in a lot of respects. And I like that, the Gwendoline Christie character trying to ask why they're there, and then gets really defensive and brings her people, and it's a really kind of scary moment that these people might attack him because you can't tell what they're doing, but they're there to look for Miss Casey. And Gwendoline Christie's like, you need to leave. He's like, we're not leaving. Mark goes, we're not leaving until you tell us what you know about Miss Casey. And then we find out that the people, Miss Casey came and talked to him and worked with them, and one guy talks about how his Outie saw the stars and it made him feel special. And I like the fact that, these individuals are just like every other Innie individual. Mark says, what happens when you guys are put into that elevator and made to disappear? And like, what would you do in that fact? And I like the fact that, Gwendoline Christie's character says, we're not going to hinder you. We're not going to hinder you at all from your search. And the guy comes in and she's like, well, you guys need to leave. And it really is telling that there's something more sinister, something more unsettling going on in this world. And that the nature of the board that we still haven't discovered who they are, it possibly is Egan or whatever, but it's just the nature of like how these different worlds are so separated and don't know each other. And I found it really hilarious and kind of a great joke that is paid off, where there's a rumor how the macrodata refinement group is still assumed to have pouches, and Gwen and Christie's like, to Helly and Mark is like, can you lift up your shirt? And they lift up their shirt and there's no pouches. And the guy's like, you don't know. So that's a great payoff for that joke, because it is a joke from the first season. But once again, leaning into the possibility of the cloning thing that everybody seems to have this, theorizing going on. It is possible. I mean, the idea of goats being cloned is a thing that's, or sheep has been cloned and stuff like that, and it is very possible that this is where it's leaning. But once again, Cold Harbor, is it like dealing with the idea of like being off on your own in your own kind of world? I mean, it's just, who knows? I honestly don't know the answer to that question, to be fairly honest, and I'm going to be really interested to see what happens. But some really kind of interesting, thought-provoking, really human moments happened in this episode, not with especially Mark and Helly and stuff like that, because we know that Mark and Helly are dealing with the situation. It's the simple fact that Irving has that really touching moment with Felicia where they talk about Bert. Of course, Gretchen and Dylan have that we finally see the memory room. We see pictures of course, Dylan and his wife and so on and so forth. Dylan learns about his kids. I love Miss Wang and her kind of nature and how she's like, oh yeah. I love how they're very front facing when it comes to time. They're like, well, you have 18 minutes because you've done a really nice job. And it's a really kind of unique moment because of how it could possibly pay off, because as we've seen Gretchen with, Outie, Dylan, it's not a really great relationship, to be fairly honest. It seems like Dylan is not there for her. He doesn't care about her, or he cares about her, but he's stressed out. But the Innie Dylan is really kind of, he's thoughtful, he cares, he is excited, and you see it on her face, and it might lean into something. I don't know. It's very interesting to watch Gretchen kind of play into the fact that she is so at odds about Dylan not really knowing who she is, or the inner Innie Dylan. It almost feels like a fresh start, to be feeling honest, for her. And like they sit there and talk, and it almost feels like a first date again if you really look at it closely. And I love the like the calming music, and I love like as soon as Gretchen says something, Miss Shuang says, of course, don't give too much information, and and Gretchen goes, who's that child? And he goes, Miss Huang. And I love Miss Huang. I think she's a very fun character. She's very weird, and she very much fits in that Milchek mold. And there's something there. Once again, I have a kind of a possible theory on who Miss Huang who could be. I think she could be maybe a clone of Gemma. I'm not saying is what it is, but I'm saying that could be possibly a clone of somebody that maybe died or something like that. I mean, I don't know. It's really kind of interesting why they hire this kid. What is exactly is the purpose of this kid? So we'll see. But it also leads into some humility and humanity for Milchek, who is an individual that has to work with Lumen. He's not severed. He is an individual that has to keep the severed floor in check, knowing pretty much everything. Once again, like Selvig, he knows what exactly is going on, or at least he kind of knows what's going on. And when he walks into his office, he's presented with this really unfortunate, really kind of misrepresented pictures or paintings that Natalie gives to him. The board is there, and it's reinterpretations of the Egan storyline, but with African American individuals. And it's really telling how the board and Lumen really don't understand the human emotion, human psychology, human ideology very well. Because the one thing about Milchek is he is so committed to Lumen that this feels like a slight against him, a kind of be careful, you know, you could get this pulled away from you really quickly. There's an air of suspicion. There's an air of like really unencumbered sadness to what Milchek sees. And you kind of see it, a glimpse of it in Natalie's head or Natalie's eyes, where it almost feels like Lumen is really just a terrible company. I mean, they are, as you could tell, but they're not a very good company in general. They don't understand their people. They are using and reusing people. Milchek feels like he is put out because of the paintings, and I don't blame him, because you see at the end he hides the paintings. He doesn't want the paintings. Like, that's not the purpose of why he works there. His purpose of why he works there is to run a company and make sure that company is run well and hide the secrets that he probably knows. And I think the glimpse of humanity for Milchek is really fascinating, to be fairly honest. I think it's appreciative of a character that could be really one note. I think, you know, the idea of Milchek in the season really enhances Tramell Tillman's status in that season. Like, he was really good in the last season, but he is really good in this season. I think he's actually the standout because of the level of what he has to do for this season as the new head of Severed Floor. And I think, you know, maybe we'll see, but I think there is some truth and some honesty to maybe his character doesn't like where this is headed. And, you know, it was like with the idea of like the computer not being changed and all that good stuff. It really is a pretty great stuff, to be fairly honest. And it leads into, you know, Cabell Selvig, whoever you want to call her, the Patricia Arquette character. She has basically escaped from Lumenville, or whatever you want to call it. And she stops, and the one running thing about her is she has this tube, like this air, like the thing you would put the, like, for people breathing, if they were sick or something like that. Why she has that, and what exactly that means, and what exactly happened to her, and her arc in this story is so interesting and so different that you got to kind of wonder what it all means. Why is she at Lumen? Why is she so insistent going back on the Severed Floor? She's like, oh, I'm the only one that can handle Cold Harbor. But like, is the whole idea of like, you know, cloning? Is she trying to get her husband back? Is she trying to get her kid back? Is she really committed to making sure the program works so she can get her kid back, or her husband, or whatever, whoever has died? Is she impassioned to try and get Egan? Was Egan related? I mean, were they a couple? I mean, who knows, to be fairly honest, because it really is, you know, she goes back and she is so committed to going, I want my demands met. And Helly is walking to her car, you know, being taken home or whatever. And Helly's like, okay, so we can talk. Is that really what you want? I can bring you to the board, and it scares Cabell to go back to her car. And I love this scene because Cabell Selvig is so scared and so skittish that she ran away from Mark. She runs away from everything. She's left with the menace of like, how dangerous is Lumen, to be fairly honest? How dangerous is this company? You know, they sent that security agent after Mark, to be fairly honest. So there's a level of menace, and I really like that suspenseful moment of her just staring at Cabell as she walks away and goes to her car. And how dangerous is Lumen, to be fairly honest? As we can tell, probably pretty dangerous. So I really like that. I think it's a really fascinating take. It really shows that Cabell is Cabell's Cabell. She's a really weird individual. And thus begins the Rogabi storyline that has been, you know, continued from the last season, where what happened to PD, he was killed, or he died because of the reintegration, to kind of reform back the two halves of the severed individual. And she tells Mark, as I've said earlier, that he is never going to be able to figure out, never going to be able to get succeed in his plan to make his Innie work with him. So she offers him to, with the help of the simple fact that she knows Gemma's alive, to basically reintegrate Mark into his normal self, back, two pieces back into whole. But with that nature, he's brought down to this place in his basement. She basically adds things to him and puts him into this what would be a scan of your eye or blow of your eye or something like that when you're doing an eye test. And she starts asking him questions, and I love the nature of this scene for the simple fact of that this is going to affect Mark in various ways, because we see him start answering questions, and then his Innie and his Outie self start kind of reintegrating themselves into one whole, so that we see the flash back and forth of Mark when you see him go from himself at Lumen to himself at his house, and we see him on the table, and they're asking, who are you? And it's all these questions they're trying to basically take the brain waves and kind of form them back into one whole. So therefore it's similar to the Matrix scenario, where the questions are being asked, but they're being asked for a specific reason to help Mark try to put himself into one whole piece. And I like the questions are so simple, and they start becoming more and more outrageous and more confusing to Mark, to the point where he just becomes one whole mess of an individual before the episode ends. And I really like that. I like those ideas when you completely cut in half the soul or the person, and you're trying to form them back together, because you're literally trying to stitch the person back together, in pieces. When they when she puts when Gabi puts the little thing against his skull where the little chip is at, and his hand starts shaking and everything, she realizes she's going too far, and she kind of has to slowly build it up. It's great. It really is. It's good stuff. So I really appreciate that. It's going to be really interesting to see for people when it gets to, what that entails and stuff like that. Next week, once again, is probably my favorite episode of the season, but this is once again a good start to the more and more mystery of this season, what it's doing and how it's entailing. So overall, this is a lot of stuff I've talked about. It's a lot of stuff going on. I really think it's a fantastic episode. I think it does a lot. I think it entails a lot. I think it brings in some really honest storytelling elements. I think it brings in some honest, down-to-earth character development. I think it allows characters to go into new places. I think it allows characters to expand those new places. And I love the personal moments and personal touches, as well as the big ideas that are being presented to us that have been kind of building as we've gone through the first and second season here. So overall, like I said earlier, 9.5 out of 10. I think this is fantastic. I think it's great. It continues why this series is so special and why I love it so much. So overall, great episode. Definitely worth a watch. But with that said, that is my take of the third episode of the second season of Severance, which is called Who is Alive, directed by Ben Stiller. Thank you. It's been about a half hour talking, so I apologize. But anyways, with that said, comments below. What did you think of this episode? Where do you think it's headed? What do you think of the presentation? What do you think of the ideas being presented? Where do you think the series is going for this second season? What do you think is happening? Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm not right? Just let me know in the comments below. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell top to find what's coming next. If you like this video, awesome. Hit that like button. As always, we'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out, guys.